Hey, hi, and welcome. World War III update. Okay, it's another warm one. And the poor girl. It is 28. Okay, it's the humidity that really does you in, eh? As long as you're not in the direct hot sun, you're okay. Fortunately, there's a funeral today. I'm not going, but my dad's just going there now. So, but it's like he was 80, 84, 83. So, you know, that is what it is. So, yeah. All right. So anyway, check out my hat. And where do I want to start with this one? Let's see. Well, I guess I could start with the UK sending a second warship to the Strait of Hormuz and in the Persian Gulf. I think, you know, depending on where these warships are, depends on where the threat. Somebody was making a good, a good observation. I can't remember who it was. Where, you know, like the idea is to provoke Iran into firing first, right? The Iranians aren't stupid. They're probably not going to do that unless they desperately have to do it. So if you could put warships everywhere, they're always going to be running into conflict, right? So that increases your chances for your neocon war or whatever. But the thing is that what they really want is for Iran to sink an aircraft carrier. That's why they would put them in Strait of Hormuz. There would be no reason to put warships in there if you were ready to go to war, because you'd be sunk so quick. I know some people think their stuff is invincible and so. No, you'd be, the HMS Duncan, I think, is the one, whichever frigates or warships they got in there, or destroyers they got in there. It's like they can't go anywhere. You know what I mean? Like aircraft will take them out. Ground artillery will probably take them out. The speedboats alone will take it. Like the Iranians are, you know, a lot of people look at like these 250 speedboats, whatever. Some of them anti-shipping capable, missile capable. I look at it and say, well, it's just because these people are on a tight budget. No, they're in shallow water. They want a boat that they can, you know, run up onto the beach if they have to. They want a boat that they can launch from any beach if they need to. You know what I mean? So strategy-wise, no, the Iranians have thought this out well. They don't need big battle cruisers and destroyers and frigates and stuff like that. I think they have like a couple of corvettes and one or two destroyers. That's it. That's enough for them because they know that the midget submarines are going to be a better investment. That's why they're building those. Because those midget submarines, their draft is the same as they can submerge in less draft than an aircraft carrier. So these guys could sneak around with the torpedo bay doors open, and like these submarines aren't that advanced. The torpedoes are, but the submarines that they're using aren't that advanced. They don't need to be. You know, they're just carrying torpedoes, right? But these submarines are good enough to be able to carry anti-shipping missiles. So they could be sitting kind of like how a pike sits in a lily pads waiting for fish to come out and then come out and get you, right? Well, they could be sitting there in the slightly deeper areas or even in the shallow areas and fire these anti-shipping missiles from their submarines. You know, hit and run tactics in coordination with the speedboats. So the speedboats could overwhelm the aircraft carrier or destroyer or whatever while they're fending off it's like swatting flies, obviously the warships have an advantage over these little boats, but it's the numbers, right? It's the numbers. It's, you might destroy out of 250 of them, you might get 50 of them, but you're going to lose a destroyer or an aircraft carrier, whatever. But thing is that they can use, let's say you had 8 Iranian speedboats with that'd be 4 anti-shipping missiles per speedboat, and they coordinate and they hone in and they just start firing. First thing the aircraft's going to the warship's going to do is its defense system is going to start popping smoke, and the fouling system or Skyguard or whichever one they have, the Vulcan minigun is going to go into action shooting down. The problem is there's usually only one of those on a ship. So if the missiles are coming in this way while it's shooting that way, it just, it's too short of a distance to be able to get all the missiles coming in. Now, while it's doing that, it'll be, the front gun will either be shooting at missiles or trying to engage the speedboats. I think the ship would have to go just into defensive mode. Now, while that's happening, that's when your sub's going to fire either torpedo, maybe one torpedo and an anti-shipping, missile. Goodbye destroyer, goodbye aircraft carrier. And mind you, I don't think they have the quite firepower to destroy an aircraft carrier with a single torpedo, but definitely enough to cripple it with a single torpedo. The big problem is almost all these warships are nuclear. So there's that disaster waiting to happen, like the reactor meltdowns, right? So we're talking like a Fukushima type of event. The torpedoes, once they hit, they blow up. There might be a little bit of fire. Anti-shipping missile, they blow up. The ship catches fire. But once that fire's done, the disaster's there because you got a big lump of metal blocking the Strait of Hormuz. But where the real disaster is in the nuclear reactor meltdowns. I don't think ships, planes, anything like that. Again, that's why I'm against nuclear power, because if it goes wrong, stuff leaks out for the next 25,000 years, right? But that's what they're doing. So there's clearly an agitation. Why the UK is interested in the agitation. A lot of speculation on that. Someone was like, well, they're building the alliance now, so when the war starts, the UK can just jump in right away. Maybe that's it. We'll have to watch it and see. But the news is still like making it sound as if Iran just took these freighters out of nowhere. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, yeah, but they never talk about, they're sitting there. They got all these panelists on saying that, the Iranians, took these warships and whatever. Yeah, but nobody asks why. Not a single mainstream media has asked, why did they take the ship? See, once you ask that question, then you have to say, well, a week before, the British seized one of their ships. So the Iranians, are just showing, no, we can do this too. We can shut down the Strait of Hormuz anytime we want. Which, keep in mind, the Strait, that region, 1/3 of the world's oil supply comes through that region. The Iranians basically can collapse the world economy in basically in hours with that, completely shutting everybody off. 1 week without 1/3 of the world's oil reserves coming through, the amount of pressure that puts on, it'll just truckers won't be able to get enough fuel. It would be a global disaster because of globalism. We've hooked ourselves onto being as independent as possible, right? So the Iranians know this. So they do have an upper hand here. So really, when people do a show of force off their coast, they're not really scared. They don't really seem to be nervous or scared at all. You know what I mean? They really, really do have an upper hand in the region. So, keep in mind, since 1979, the Iranians were backstabbed by the U.S. with, regime change there. So they've never gotten over that, and obviously, when the U.S., backed Saddam Hussein to attack Iran, I think it was 76 or 79 to 81, 82, 83, the Iraq-Iran war, they gave, Saddam, some chemical weapons to use against the Iranians. So they're not going to let that go. These people don't let stuff like that go too lightly, right? So from that time on, they've been pretty much really preparing to fight the U.S., Israel, whoever else, NATO, whoever wants to come in. Now, are they at the level of Russia and China? No, not even close. But are they enough to defend their region? Yeah, I think they are. We still don't know what their electronic warfare capabilities are. My hunch is that it's probably somewhere around the Chinese, because I think most of the technology they are using is the Chinese technology. But it's a weird thing, whose scientists are better, the Chinese scientists or the Iranian ones? It seems like they work hand in, or the North Korean ones. They all do seem to be working hand in hand. Now, using North Korea, for example, we know North Korea is a backwards country, and most people are going to be uneducated and poverty-stricken and stuff like that because of the horrible regime. But when they need somebody, I mean, those people get full attention. Like it's like you want, oh, this one's showing a little bit of promise. Yeah, let's make that one an intelligence officer. Let's make that one a a nuclear physicist or whatever. Yeah, so they do pick and choose. They just don't give the entire population the option. China's a little different. China, East Asians tend to put a lot of emphasis on their education. Doesn't mean there's no stupid people in China. Of course there is, or uneducated or whatever. But in general, they do have a lot of academically smart people, which means I think the Japanese, have better scientists than just about anybody in that region. But the Chinese would be probably just behind that. You know what I mean? So it means that when it comes to reverse engineering stuff, that's their first learning capability is to reverse engineer stuff and then improve upon it, or learn how to defeat it. So that's the Chinese method. So I can imagine if they're using that method, so are the Iranians. Saying, okay, well, I mean, and in fact, that's exactly what the Iranians are doing. They're taking old U.S. technology and just upgrading it, like the Phoenix AIM-54 missile. The original one, I think, had a 90-mile or 130-mile range, somewhere between there, depending on altitude or whatever. Now they've got it out to about 150 miles. So they made the same missile, but they just extended the range with it. They've probably upgraded the guidance system a little bit. But basically, just rather than reinventing the wheel, they just keep reverse engineering and refining the wheel. So they probably do have enough technology to be dangerous enough to basically take out the Navy. And the Iranians know that the real threat to them is the Navy, not even the Air Force. And I'll tell you why. Because even though they don't have as big they only got a couple of hundred planes, that's not their problem. Their problem is the aircraft carriers bringing in hundreds of a couple of hundred of aircraft at a time. The American bases in the region they can take out with the heavy rockets and cruise missiles. So they're not really that worried about that because they know even if they can fight them long enough, the U.S. bases long enough to destroy the supply route. So once the Americans are running low on supplies, they're going to have to leave or else they're going to die, right? So they know that, so they can keep the pressure on that. Plus they've got all kinds of proxies like the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, all these guys, right? So they're not worried as much about that, but the Navy is the key because the Navy is what resupplies everything. So they shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and they can. No Navy's going to get in or out of the Strait of Hormuz, without their say-so. So once they do that, then it's Fortress Iran. You're not going to, they'll control the entire region. Really, there's nothing the Israelis or the Americans can really do. The Israelis might be a little more advanced than Iran. Well, actually, a lot more advanced than Iran. The Israelis might, some of their equipment's more advanced than the Americans because it's they get the first grabs at everything. You know what I mean? Like look at the F-35s. They get them before anybody else does, other than the U.S. Right? So and the Israelis they tweak this stuff to their liking. You know what I mean? I mean, some people have speculated that the whole F-35 is really designed for Iran to take out the Iranian nuclear facility, but that's kind of a dumb thing in a sense because if that's all they built it for, okay, well, it wouldn't be all they built it for, but the primary role that they built it for, it's the backlash of like the nuclear program really isn't that big of a deal. It would make the people suffer, if they had nuclear reactors knocked out. Well, then you got all these people that can't run. The Iranian people wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't have electricity, right? So, yeah, they could kill a lot of people that way. I mean, it's the hot desert, right? But even at that, it's like it won't work because the counter, you might be able to pull off the raid, but the counterattack wipes out Israel. The neocons are nuts. They're just absolutely insane. But moving along. Probably be bringing up Iran a few more times here, but this one was interesting. This one was in the East China Sea, I believe, or was it the South China Sea? Anyway, two H-6 Chinese bombers and a Russian Tu-95 were basically border buzzing. Not Taiwan, but anyway, in that area, South Korea launched some F-15s and F-16s, and they fired up to 360 warning shots in front of the bombers, like live fire. Like, yeah, this is a first. I don't think I've reported on this where, like there's been a lot of saber rattling where, airplanes have come in and almost hit wingtip to wingtip, and Su-27s doing barrel rolls over, and Su-30s doing barrel rolls over Poseidon spy planes and stuff like that. That was about the craziest we got. But this, no, they fired a few, I think 3 or 4 bursts to, the Russians are saying no, they were in international airspace, so were the Chinese. The South Koreans saying no, you were in our airspace, and turn around and we're going to shoot you down. So they fired a couple of bursts in front of these bombers. But these are live rounds. These are not blanks. These are live rounds. What could possibly go wrong? Could you imagine if the South Koreans accidentally shot down or killed, shot down a Russian bomber? What kind of international incident does that create? You know what headache that would create for the South Koreans? I mean, the Russians, they wouldn't let that go pretty easy. There would be a lot of stuff. I mean, look what happened to Turkey after they shot down the Russian plane. Like Russia hit them. They don't hit them directly. They're not going to use military force. No, they hit them economically. They did this, they did that. The Russian tourism pretty much dried up in Turkey, which really hurt them economically. And now look what Turkey's doing. They're more flipping towards the Russian side, right? Saying, okay, well, you killed our guys and whatever. You're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for that. And here's how you're going to pay for it. You're going to buy our stuff now. So now we see the Turks buying Russian equipment, right? Yeah. So yeah, there's that. But anyway, the idea that live rounds are fired, that's beyond saber rattling. That's one step away. And if it was only bombers, they were lucky. There would have been some Su-30s there seeing those, whatever. Like one thing, when airplanes go on a patrol, let's say it's a bunch of RAF Typhoons or American F-16s or F-22s or whatever, or Russian Su-30s or Su-27s, doesn't really matter. They usually go without missiles on board. That's usually the first thing, right? So that it's kind of like, it's a less of an aggressive stance. However, almost every aircraft has their, live rounds in the cannons. Just in case, you know what I mean? Because you can't see, you don't know if they have anything, if they're, these are just, dry airplanes, or if they've got, weapons on them, But if there would have been a pair of Su-30s in there seeing this going on, you could have had a dogfight. And my hunch would be that, it could escalate pretty quickly. I'm sure you would lose a bomber or two. Like the F-16s would fly circles around the bombers. F-15 would fly circles around the bombers. But, South Korean pilot, F-15s against Su-30s, at that closer range, the better pilot's going to win. You know what I mean? Like these airplanes, they might even end up shooting each other in a stalemate. You know what I mean? These airplanes, maneuverability-wise and power-wise, the Su-30s that's a force to be reckoned with, right? If that were to happen, I mean, that's a hell of an escalation. Where does it go from there? But yeah, so live rounds being fired in front of Russian bombers, but I'm sure it's fine. Obviously, the Iranians use drones. And the Americans use drones, and they're always like tagging each other's warships with their drones, right? Watching them or whatever. Now, the Americans have said any Iranian drone that comes into their area, they're going to shoot down. Now, the drones are typically cheap, so except for this Q4 drone that the Iranians shot down. That one was expensive. That one's gonna raise your taxes. But these other drones are, they're designed to be cheap on purpose. They're meant to be out there as a scout, so you could see over the horizon. So it's kind of like using a periscope to look over the trench rather than stick your head up because you're gonna get shot, right? So what they were saying about that drone incident was that the Americans are saying we shot down possibly 2 drones, one for sure, possibly a second one. The Iranians saying they did no such thing. And then they showed drone footage with a timestamp that went past the time allotted. Now that said, maybe there was multiple drones and the Iranians could be lying too. We don't really know. So we don't know if the Americans, accidentally shot down one of their own drones, which is possible. I mean, very, very possible. Not all drones are like really sophisticated. So, you might not realize that it's one of your guys patrolling, right? But it doesn't matter. They're drones. Like, I mean, they're cheap, right? But the other option is that the Americans did shoot down these 2 drones, which is probably more likely, and the Iranians had a third drone in the area. Yeah, so nobody really knows what happened, but the Iranians have showed footage saying, look at the timestamp. The drone was still flying fine. They didn't shoot it down. They must have shot down one of their own. That said, it could have been maybe an Israeli drone, Mossad drone, right? So, maybe the Americans accidentally shot down an Israeli drone, trying to blame it on the Iranians, because the Israelis tend to do that, with their Mossad or whatever, where they, set up false flags all the time. But anyway, that's where that stands. Who knows? Obviously, China is pretty upset with the United States sending basically some new M1A2s, Abrams tanks to Taiwan, and some Stinger missiles. So it does look like the U.S. is really taking a stance on Taiwan, where the one China policy is no longer recognized, where from forever and a day, since the first attempted invasion of Taiwan, or the first few attempts by China, that China's like, anybody that basically tries to take Taiwan from us, we are going to, we'll shoot you down. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to, bloody your nose if you do that. So the Americans have been taking a pro-Taiwan stance, independence stance. While this is going on, you have Hong Kong on the other side, which some people think is regime change going on there, demanding independence from China. Now, the next one to go after would probably be Malaysia or Singapore, particularly Singapore, because China pretty much controls that. They control the region. If you want to take down China economically, you have to make these countries around them independent again. So the Chinese still use the Soviet model of, basically conquering your neighbors. You can let them think they have their own country, whatever. And basically, it's what happened like in Eastern Europe with the Soviet Union, right? Same kind of thing. But a lot of people don't want that. They don't want to be run by the Chinese. I don't blame them. And if that happens, it does it does 2 things. Number one, it opens up the possibility, for example, U.S. bases going to Taiwan. Once you got that, now China's going to be pissed. What they will do, I think, is they will probably follow the Russian model of arming up South America, which they seem to be in. They're not fully in on it like the Russians are, because the way they look at it is, if you got U.S. bases in South Korea, U.S. bases in Taiwan, U.S. bases in Hong Kong, U.S. bases in Singapore, they're surrounded, right? They won't be able to control the region. So the only thing they can do is say, well, we need to be able to do the same thing. And the Chinese have the numbers to do it. A lot of people, I remember Canadian Prepper did a video on it, and he brought out a really good point that, I had to agree with. And I'm glad he made that video, finally realizing the threat China actually is to the world. In that sense, that, whenever they, like the Chinese, the Americans are, attacking everybody and doing regime change everywhere. Yeah, that's a threat to the world. I don't deny that. But the thing is when the Chinese start doing it, they're going to do it after an economic collapse of the Americans. Americans are going to be too busy trying to fend off civil wars at home. The Chinese are just going to be able to roll over every country. The difference is the Chinese are trying to buy everybody out. But once they control the whole board, and they got a lot of it, I mean, Canada here, I mean, foreign investment, every time you hear that term foreign investment, it's pretty much going to be a Chinese investment, right? Uh, our country's being sold to China. And once they control all that, then they're going to control your politicians, control everything. You're going to be under, Chinese social credit system, all that stuff. They are a threat to the world. They are a threat to the world. It's just they play a different, they play a much longer game, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to subvert them over time rather than try to, take the castle. We'll wait till they open the doors and just, sneak in one guy at a time. They're very patient that way, They're not like these neocons in the West where we have to go to war right now. Then it's like, no, we're going to take over without firing a shot, which is a clever plan because, again, it's cheaper that way and they win the table, right? So, yeah, it's just a different form of war. But the thing is that, yeah, they're going to be very pissed about that. Like the Chinese were out there, threatening anybody messes with Taiwan, there's going to be hell to pay, So would the Chinese strike Taiwan? Well, the Chinese could take Taiwan if nobody else jumps in to help them. But the problem is it would be such a messy war. The Taiwanese, like, again, it'd be like fighting Iwo Jima, right? Like they'd be able to probably hold out for at least a year against the Chinese, even though the Chinese are much superior force. But you take in the land, you take in the fortifications, you take in all that stuff. Most likely the Taiwanese would be starved out. Is more likely what would happen. But the Chinese, again, if they had to sacrifice, 3 times their military population to take it, they still win because they got such a big population. But anyway, yeah, that's what's going on there. We'll keep an eye on that. What else do we got here? What was this? This was. Oh, the Iran Special Forces, South Front was covering that and said these guys have, I'm probably going to butcher the name, the audits, between 15,000 and 20,000 guys, some estimate as low as 5,000. But these are the guys that are basically training up the Houthis, training up the Syrians, training up, I guess they're getting involved in Venezuela now. So like I was saying before, and obviously they're working with the Lebanese, they're working with pretty much everybody, in the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever. And they basically use these guys kind of on the lines of like the Russian Spetsnaz, which, I think there's about 5,000 of those guys with the Russians. The Green Berets is something like 7,000. And the British SAS is like 400 to 600, right? So these special forces, special operations guys, what they're more to do is to train up the other guys that are the proxies, right? So kind of like what the Mossad does with ISIS and the US, the CIA does with ISIS. They train them up and whatever. The difference is that Iran has more guys in the region, so they can train a lot more people faster. This is why you're seeing the Houthis building their own cruise missiles. Like, it's like, okay, these guys were just a bunch of ragtag farmers. How the hell are they doing this? You know what I mean? So there's got to be people helping them, obviously. To me, my hunch is big money coming in from Russia and China. Because where the hell are the Houthis going to get the money, right? They don't have any assets. But yeah, so their training stuff, how good are they in comparison to, say, the Mossad? I think they're probably just as good or better. I would say they're probably on par with the counterterrorism of the Spetsnaz. Like think the Chechen, those guys. This is also would explain, and I've already made the observation before. I'm pretty sure would most likely we don't know exactly how they operate, but. you could tell that anytime Israel or the United States tries to do a regime change protest in Iran, it gets stomped out right away. So these guys seem to be able to find the provocateurs. Now we also had Iran recently just, I don't know if they've executed them yet, but there's like 17, what they said CIA guys. They might be just innocent people, who knows, but saying that, if using them as an example, say, if you are thinking about, overthrowing us and working with the Americans or the Israelis, here's what's going to happen to you. So, who knows if these are actually CIA Mossad guys? My hunch is they probably are. How much of a link? Who knows? But let's say it's like a protester that's heading an anti-Iran protest, but they know they're getting Western funding. They say, okay, well, we'll just call that guy a CIA guy or a Mossad. They might not be, but they might just say, well, that's enough to link them to the Mossad or whatever. Which, if you were to follow the money, chances are you'd probably track it back to the Mossad or whatever. So in other words, they're the useful idiot that gets killed. But they're also the show trial to show the rest of the Iranians don't fall out of line, right? Keep loyal to the regime or else. I think the majority of the people are loyal to Iran anyway. Look at Venezuela. Maduro's a horrible leader. Even if the United States wasn't trying to overthrow Venezuela, you could clearly see that Maduro would be a horrible. Venezuela was one of the most wealthiest countries, forever and a day, and then people voted for the free stuff, and 10 years later, they can't even keep the lights on. You know what I mean? Now, mind you, I think there's a lot of cyber warfare going on for that one. I think that what's probably going on with the Iranians and the Venezuelans is saying, look, this is how they usually do. This is what they did in Syria and Ukraine and stuff like that. This is how they armed up the protesting populations and whatever. Now, Venezuelans have a lot to protest against, but the people organizing at the very top, this Guaido guy, you don't hear from him anymore because they've cut off either the supplies to this guy, like the money or whatever, the campaign. So they've learned how to lock it down through anti-terrorism. You see this with the Russians in like Grozny and Chechnya and all those places. The anti-terrorism units find the other agents. So again, it's like a 007 spy via spy stuff. We'll never know what the body count is on that. But even the Israelis have had to say they can't subvert the Iranians. It doesn't seem to work there. It worked in Syria because the Syrians, again, if Assad knew what he knew now, the first thing he probably would have ordered his soldiers to do when the Free Syrian Army protests started was to kill those guys out right away, and everybody that supported them. They should have executed John McCain right on Syrian soil, saying no, that's not happening here. But they didn't know, right, that it was going to do that. They didn't realize all these, once they knocked down Libya was the big key, right? So that's how you could get all these North African jihadist mercenaries into, al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS and all that. Most of them weren't Syrian. The majority of the ISIS guys aren't Syrian. They're mercenaries from North Africa and stuff like that. Armed by, Israel and the United States and whatever. It's openly admitted, it's openly admitted. They just call them moderate rebels when they arm them. But when you say, well, who are the moderate rebels? Well, it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and al-Nusra and whatever. Nusra Front and whatever. They change the flavor of the name every now and then, but it's the same guys. So it's not working anymore. And the Libyans, well, Haftar there, you don't hear much from him, but he seems to be holding his own fairly well there, which cuts off the ISIS guys a lot. But there's still that liability of that kind of open border between Syria and Libya. But the thing is that the Iranians don't have that problem. Why? Because they've kind of got fortification through proxy around them. The Houthis, for example, where it's like, okay, if anybody comes in that you don't know, shoot them. So you can't just sneak in your bandits of ISIS guys, your Sunni Shia war. You can't get it going easy like that. It's working in favor of Iran doing that themselves, to like say Saudi Arabia or whatever, but it doesn't work the other way around because they've got too many guys on the, watching the fence. You know what I mean? So they learned from what happened to Assad, and they've really stepped up their game. So now, like, the Iranians are in a position where they can defend themselves on several levels. So, like, they're not going to get a defecting military. The Venezuelan military didn't. They stayed loyal to their country. They didn't defect, right? It's not like '91 with Desert Storm, where almost all the Iraqi, I forget how many, they were surrendering in the droves. They just didn't want to fight. They were like, no, we don't like Saddam either. The Iraqi Republican Guard was going to hand Saddam Hussein over. George Bush disbanded them on purpose so that wouldn't happen, because it would have ended the war and Iraq would still be in one piece. You know what I mean? I mean, sure, they would have gotten another dictator. I mean, it was the U.S. that helped to get Saddam in there in the first place. But like I said, we end up arming the people we fight in the future, right? But with Iran, that's not happening. You know what I mean? That's not happening. They have broken away from the Anglo-American Empire. So the British, again, for them to pick a fight, I mean, they got Boris Johnson now. We're going to find out how much of a neocon he is. But I think, like, the British to pick a fight with the Iranians would be the dumbest thing for the UK to do. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the resources to fight a fight like that. Yes, the British have a more advanced military, and no one's going to doubt that, but it's just not big enough. You know what I mean? The Iranians have a 1 million man military, you know what I mean? And they've got 80 million people, which is, I guess the UK population is somewhere like 60, 80 million people. But the thing is the Iranians, have the home advantage. It's like the good thing about Iran is they're not gonna be able to span out from the region. They wouldn't be able to do it in 100 years. You know what I mean? They're not there. Even if they had like U.S. or British type military equipment, which eventually they're going to get, or at least up to Chinese spec anyway, they're going to get there pretty soon. In some ways, they'll probably even surpass that. But it's low in numbers. But once they do, even at that, the logistics, even China could not do a Red Dawn style invasion on, say, like Taiwan. They don't have the logistics to move. And the Chinese have more amphibious vehicles, APCs, than any other country in the world, including the United States, which is designed specifically to run up on a beach. And that's why they have to build all these giant hovercrafts, these French hovercrafts. And that's why they're going into mass producing AN-225s. You know what I mean? They need about 200 of those if they wanted to do a Red Dawn style invasion on it. But that's going to take them 20, 30 years just to get half of that done. Not to mention all the hiccups that are going to go along the way. Look at how long it's taken them to get their aircraft carriers. It's not like World War II where, I was watching a couple of documentaries past couple of nights. One on the Bismarck, the hunt for the Bismarck, and if you haven't heard Sabaton's Bismarck song, it's awesome. I'm going to be playing that one on the mandolin hopefully this week at the Jam Night if I get to go. And then there's the other thing is the Type 21 U-boat, how they built it and stuff like that. They were able to build 18 of those, under wartime conditions. They were able to build 18 of those Type 21 U-boats, at that time. You take the Corvettes, the Flower Corvettes or whatever that, Canada had, UK had, the Americans had, whatever. We were able to build a couple of those a month. You know what I mean? Like it was that was like lightning pace. A battleship or a destroyer. You're talking like a year to build those things, right? And that's World War II specs. Now, the thing about those older, World War II things, they had very little wiring in them. You look at our Halifax class frigates. When we revamped them in 2003, by the time we were done the revamping, we had to upgrade things. New technologies came along.